Γεια σας, είμαι ο Μανώτς.
Είμαι η Απαρνά.
Καλώς ήρθατε στην Ελλάδα. Καλώς ήρθατε στο κανάλι μας. Ναι, μιλάω ελληνικά, αλλά δεν μιλάω τόσο καλά. Καταλαβαίνω περισσότερο, αλλά όταν μιλάω συνήθως κολλάω. Ελπίζω να βελτιώσω τα ελληνικά μου στις επόμενες 10 μέρες, μιλώντας με τους τοπιούς. Για να δούμε. Καλημέρα, η πρώτη μας μέρα στην Ελλάδα. Μην ανησυχείτε, αυτά τα επεισόδια δεν είναι όλα στα ελληνικά. Δεν μπορώ να μιλήσω για μια ώρα μόνο στα ελληνικά. Επομένως.
We are at Knossos in Crete, the heart of the Minoan civilization, the dawn of Bronze Age in Europe. Minoans appeared here around 3000 BC. Their civilization peaked around 2000 BC. Their decline started in 1650 BC. There are several parallels between them and our Indus Valley civilization. The time frame of both matches. Their script is also undeciphered. Minoans had two of them, the Cretan hieroglyphics and the Linear A, both undeciphered. They most likely weren't Indo-Europeans, that is, their language was not Greek. We didn't even know these guys existed until an accidental discovery in the late 19th century. We don't even know what they called themselves. Minoans is a name we gave them based on the Greek myth of Minotavros. According to that myth, Crete was once ruled by a king called Minos, and his wife gave birth to a half-man, half-bull monster which was kept locked in a labyrinth below the palace. Athens, which was vassal of Crete at that time, had to send 20 youths every year as food for the monster. The Athenian prince Thysaea volunteered to be one of the victims and killed the monster to free his people. The myth seems to have some kernel of truth. The Minoan people were indeed controlling all of Aegean during their peak, and they do seem to have had many bull-based rituals, as seen from this famous bull-leaping fresco, housed today in the Heraklion Museum.
Νοικιάσαμε αυτοκίνητο από το Ηράκλειο και οδηγήσαμε μία μισή ώρα προς τα δυτικά και φτάσαμε στο Ρετυμνό. Πίσω μου είναι ο φάρος του Ρετυμνού.
Rethymno was an old Minoan town which came into prominence in the 13th century when the Venetians developed the port here. Venetians wanted an intermediate commercial stop between Heraklion and Chania. If you want to know how the Venetians appeared in Greece, stick on till the end of Day 5. The old town is one of the best preserved in all of Crete and was entirely built during the Venetian era. Its notable structures are the Neradche Mosque, an old Augustinian monastery converted to a mosque by the Ottomans, the Venetian-era Church of Saint Mary, which now houses the museum, and the 1626 Rimondi Fountain. The star attraction of the city is the star-shaped Venetian fortress, which the Ottomans successfully breached in 1646. The Ottomans left their mosque by constructing the imposing Sultan bin Ibrahim Mosque inside the fort. The lighthouse in the harbor was built in the 19th century by the Egyptians.
Μια ώρα πιο δυτικά από τον Ρετυμνό είναι η πόλη Chania.
Like Rethymno, Chania also started off as a Minoan town, but it retained its importance during the Byzantine and Arab rule leading up to the Venetians. Its harbor is the prettiest in all of Crete, and its old town houses this Agios Nikolaos, the only church in Greece that has both a bell tower and a minaret. Another must-see is this new archaeological museum. The very well laid out exhibit include this array of Minoan clay bulls, a 2nd century marble sculpture of Emperor Hadrian, and this Roman mosaic.
Αυτό είναι το δωμάτιο μας στη Χάνια και μικρό μπάνιο. Καλημέρα, η δεύτερη μέρα μας στην Ελλάδα. Είμαστε στην Χάνια. Αυτό πίσω μου είναι η παραλία μπροστά στο ξενοδοχείο μας. Αυτό είναι το ξενοδοχείο μας. Τα προτείνουμε. Τώρα είναι 7 το πρωί. Θα πάρουμε το αυτοκίνητο και θα πάμε στη Ιραμονή Αρκαδίου.
When Greece got its independence from the Ottomans in 1821, Crete was not part of it. Cretan struggle for independence continued for half a century more. One of the watershed moments of that Cretan resistance happened in this monastery. In 1866, about 1,000 civilians took refuge here to escape the approaching Ottoman forces. The Ottomans decided to besiege the fort. When the capture was imminent, the locals, many of whom were women and children, decided to gather all the gunpowder they could muster and blow themselves up instead of surrendering. thereby killing the attacking forces as well. 846 locals and about 1,500 Ottoman soldiers died on that fateful day.
Αυτό είναι το αυτοκίνητο που νοικιάσαμε στην Κρήτη.
Next up, the Minoan town of Phaistos. One common theme in all Minoan sites is that there are no protective walls or fortifications. Their frescoes are all idyllic and have no whiff of violence in them. They seem to have lived in a very peaceful times. Their navy was so powerful that no one would dare touch them. Their main export were olives and olive oil to the biggest superpower of the Bronze Age, Egypt, which explains so many pithis found here. Pithi are these large vessels used for bulk storage of grains and oils. Phaistos is where the famed Phaistos disc was discovered. Few historians believe that this could be the world's earliest movable type print, predating the Chinese by a couple of millennia. The script seen here is the undeciphered Cretan hieroglyphics. This is the Minoan town of Gortyna. Buildings look more substantial here because these date from the Roman times. This was the Roman provincial capital. The place is famous for the Gortyn Code, the oldest law code in Greece, and it was chiseled on these walls in the 5th century BC. The writing style is called Boustrophidon, where the alternate lines are reversed and also mirrored. Here is an English version example from Wikipedia. Our final destination was Heraklion. By the way, here is where Crete is with respect to rest of Greece, and here are the sites in Crete that we covered over the past 2 days. But first things first, lunch.
Finally, some Greek food. This is hummus, and that is vegetarian souvlaki. Souvlaki is a famous Greek dish. We'll let you know how it is.
Yeah, food is very good, very tasty.
Heraklion, the capital of Crete and the 4th largest city in Greece, was the port serving the city of Knossos. After the fall of the Minoans, Heraklion disappeared from history till it was refounded by the Arabs as the capital of the Emirate of Crete in the 820s. Byzantines reconquered it a century and a half later and lost it to the Venetians in the 13th century. The absolute must-see in Heraklion is its incredible archaeological museum. Apart from the bull-leaping fresco, Gortyn Code, and the Phaistos disc seen earlier, the signature pieces include these priceless Minoan-era collections: an ivory-studded draft board, this stunning replica of a bull's head, these snake goddess figurines, and these amazing frescoes, all from the palace of Knossos. We ended the day at the Koules fortress, an Arabian-era fortress substantially rebuilt and expanded by the Venetians in 1540. Ottomans took the fort in 1630 after a 21-year-long siege. Apart from the splendid views of the city and the harbor, the fort also displays the huge amphorae collection retrieved from an ancient shipwreck.
Αυτό είναι δωμάτιο μας στην Κρήτη, μικρότατο, but at least it is close to all the attractions, so it's perfect. We can walk everywhere, and that's the toilet. Neat, clean, small, but this is the cheapest we could find. Καλημέρα, η τρίτη μας μέρα στην Ελλάδα. Είμαστε ακόμα στην Κρήτη. Είναι 6 το πρωί. Είναι η ώρα που αποχαιρετούμε στην υπέροχη Κρήτη. Πάρουμε ένα βάρκο και πάμε Santorini.
Santorini belongs to a group of islands known as Cyclades, named so because they roughly form a circle around the island of Delos. If you see the map of Santorini, it's obvious it's a caldera. That means it used to be a volcano, and its eruption was one of the biggest in recorded history. It erupted around 1650 BC. Who was doing the recording back then? Well, the Shang dynasty of China. The eruption was big enough to have affected the crop cycles there. It was this eruption that triggered the decline of the great Minoan civilization. What you see here are the ruins of the Minoan city devastated by the eruption. But unlike the more famous and much later Pompeii, no one died here. People had enough knowledge and warning to have escaped with all their possessions. All except this one miniature golden ibex statue. People, of course, couldn't carry the wonderful frescoes that once adorned the walls of their villas. The best examples of these can be seen at the Museum of Prehistoric Thera in the town of Fira, located in the middle of the island. No one except us comes to Santorini for ruins and rubbles. People flock here for this, drop-dead gorgeous Ia. Ia is a town located in the northern corner of Santorini. It used to be an old mariners' village. It was destroyed during the 1956 earthquake. The ensuing reconstruction created this dreamland of milky white edifices with ocean blue domes and windows. Today, Ia is an irresistible magnet for Instagrammers and Bollywood dream sequence creators. We came here in the sweltering midday heat. That means we had to wait only 30 minutes for this 5-second footage. Had we come here during sunset, the wait would have made us miss the return flight.
Αυτό είναι το δωμάτιο μας στην Σαντορίνη. Είναι το πιο φθηνό δωμάτιο που βρήκαμε στη Σαντορίνη. Είναι 150 ευρώ μια νύχτα. Τα δωμάτια στις Ίας ήταν πάνω 500-600 ευρώ. Είναι Αυγούστο. Αυτό είναι το μπάνιο μας. Το δωμάτιο μας έχει ένα μπαλκόνι. Ωραία είναι. Καλημέρα. Η τετάρτη μας μέρα στην Ελλάδα. Ξυπνήσαμε πολύ νωρίς για να πάρουμε η πτήση για την Αθήνα. Μετά θα νοικιάσουμε ένα άλλο αυτοκίνητα ή συνεχίσουμε η εξερευνήση μας.
The classical age in Greece started around 500 BC and its start was marked by the famous Greco-Persian War. Herodotus, the father of history, wrote the first ever book on history mainly to recount this war. One of the earliest battles of this war took place in 490 BC here in Marathon. 10,000 Athenians defeated a Persian army twice as strong against all odds. It is said that Phidippides, a messenger, first ran 243 kilometers back and forth to Sparta to request help, and seeing that the battle had been won by the time he returned, he dashed 42 kilometers back to Athens to convey the message of victory and collapsed due to exhaustion. This final 42-kilometer run is the inspiration behind the modern marathon race.
Είμαστε στον δρόμο για τη Ιεραμονή Οσίας Λουκάς και βρήκαμε αυτό το παραδοσιακό χώρο. Και σταματήσαμε για να φάμε κάτι. Αυτό είναι χωριάτικη σαλάτα, the Greek salad, the traditional Greek salad. Αυτές είναι καυτέρες λαχανικών, vegetable fritters. Αυτή είναι η μυστά.
Yeah, food was very tasty. The fritters were very similar to our veg cutlet. I guess we get ketchup, but here they serve it with tzatziki. It's like raita, a thick version of raita. And the stuffed capsicum was also good. We usually have potatoes in our stuffed capsicum tomatoes. It had rice, so it was yummy.
A couple of hours west of Marathon is the Hosios Loukas Monastery. It was founded in the 10th century by a Byzantine saint, Luke of Styris. He became famous for his healing and prophetic powers. Arab had conquered Crete about a century earlier, and is said to have correctly predicted the Byzantine reconquest of the island. Earlier, in the 7th and 8th centuries, Byzantine Empire had lost a lot of ground to the Arabs. This made the people assume God had abandoned them for the Muslims, and they blamed the painting of icons as the main reason behind it. This started the infamous iconoclast movement that lasted nearly a century, where priceless art was lost to vandalism. Iconoclasm ended in 842 AD, and this triggered a renewed fervor to create bigger and grander mosaics. Since this monastery was built shortly afterwards, this is some of the best example of the Middle Byzantine art, thanks to which this is an UNESCO World Heritage Site today. The Bronze Age abruptly ended in 1100 BC when the Dorians from northern Greece invaded the south. This gave way to the Dark Ages. Dark because there are no written record from this era. Sometimes in the middle of this era, Delphi was born. It was home to the most famous oracle in the ancient world, attracting pilgrims from as far away as Anatolia and Egypt. The two grandest temples here are dedicated to Apollo and Athena. Although what is seen today dates from the 4th century BC, classical era, these had replaced earlier structures that dated back at least a couple of more centuries. Apart from the temples, Delphi also houses a grand theatre, a sports stadium, and several treasuries built by many of the Greek city-states to commemorate victories and to thank the oracle for her advice. The one built by the Athenians after the Marathon victory is the grandest. Here is the map of today's route. Our night stop was Patras, the third largest city in Greece after Athens and Thessaloniki. Patras is not a typical tourist destination, but it still has a couple of worthy mentions. First up, this Rio-Anti-Rio bridge that connects Patras to central Greece. With a length of 2.88 kilometers, this is the world's longest fully suspended multi-span cable-stayed bridge. Ask a civil engineer what that even means. The second point of interest are these 93 marble steps built in 1930s to connect the upper and lower towns. Looks pretty ordinary, but the true magic happens when you reach the top. This was the view that awaited us. Absolutely breathtaking. One of the best sunsets of our lives. And there were hardly anyone else except us. Απίστευτο.
Αυτό είναι το δωμάτιο μας της Σπάρτας. Είναι πιο μεγάλο. Και έχουμε ένα μπαλκόνι με ωραία θέα. Τέλεια είναι. Καλημέρα, η πέμπτη μας μέρα στην Ελλάδα. Αυτό είναι το αυτοκίνητο που νοικιάσαμε στην Αθήνα. Πρώτα θα πάμε στην αρχαία Olympia.
Bronze Age gave way to Dark Age around 1100 BC. The next era was Archaic, which started around 800 BC. It was the era where literacy returned, Iliad and Odyssey were written down, colonies were created across the Mediterranean, etc. One of the earliest significant events in the Archaic Age was the first Olympic Games conducted in the honor of Zeus here in the ancient Olympia in 776 BC. It was one of the 4 Panhellenic games of ancient Greece, the other 3 being the Pythian games of Delphi, Nemean and Isthmian games of Corinth. Just like the modern version, the ancient Olympic Games were held every 4 years. But unlike the modern, which was cancelled 3 times in a century due to war, ancient Olympic Games was never cancelled due to war. War stopped for the games and not the other way around. The games continued unabated till 381 AD, when Theodosius I entered all pagan rituals across the Roman Empire. That's over 1,000 years of tradition, which ended over 2,000 years ago. No wonder nothing has survived here other than these resilient pillars. But head to the on-site museum for the fragile masterpieces unearthed from here. The highlights include these wonderful bronze sculptures, this gigantic Nike of Paianos, the astonishing recreation of the eastern pediment of the Temple of Zeus using the original sculptures, and the stride-stopping Hermes of Praxiteles. Created in 4th century BC, this is the ancient world's equivalent of Michelangelo's David. We had 2 options after Olympia. We could head straight south to ancient Messina or southeast to Basai. We chose the latter only because it is home to an UNESCO World Heritage Site, which by the way is hidden inside this gigantic tent for its protection, and that has robbed all of its visual impact. This is the temple of Apollo Epicurus, built sometime in the late 5th century by Ichthyonos, the architect of the Parthenon at Athens. An hour and a half further southeast are the ruins of ancient Sparta, the strangest society that a human mind had ever invented. There is nothing much to see here because there was nothing much to begin with. Their life was, well, Spartan. Sparta was found in the 7th century BC during the Archaic era. They soon ended up outlawing profit-making and hoarding money. Everyone here was equal. Everyone was either a hoplite soldier or a mother of one. They ate the same black bean porridge for breakfast, lunch and dinner, from birth to death. This gave Sparta something that nobody else had, a professional standing army. Everywhere else, full-time farmers doubled up as part-time soldiers during the time of war. This is why Sparta was an unbeatable force. Their town did not need any walls. No one dared to march into Peloponnese, let alone on Sparta during their peak. No one until one Epaminondas of Thebes, whose story has to wait for another day. Rome conquered Greece in the 2nd century BC. In the 4th century AD, Rome split into 2 halves and Greece became part of the Eastern Roman Empire. We call them the Byzantine Empire, but they called themselves and thought themselves as Romans. Fast forward to the 13th century AD. Western Roman Empire is now history, and West is now split between 3 kingdoms, the Kingdom of France, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Venetian Republic. They jointly launched the Fourth Crusade to take the Holy Land and Egypt from the Arabs, but that turned out to be too hard. So they turned around and attacked the Christian Byzantine Empire. All this resulted in the infamous 1204 sack of Constantinople. Byzantine Empire was dislodged and a Latin Empire was installed in its place. The old Byzantine possessions were divided among the three Latin kingdoms. Venice got the Greek islands, which explains all the Venetian forts and ports in Crete. Peloponnese became the Principality of Achaia, and Mystras, whose pictures you are seeing now, became its capital. This Latin Empire was short-lived. Byzantines under the Palaiologos dynasty made a comeback in 1259 AD, and Peloponnese became the Despotate of Morea, Mystras continuing as its capital, ruled by the sons of the Byzantine emperor. This heralded the Peloponnesian Renaissance, the final period in development of Byzantine art, and Mystras is a notable example of it. Mystras was simply spectacular. Despite being a World Heritage Site, the footfall was minimal, and roaming these wonderful churches perched upon steep cliffs with breathtaking frescoes on the inside was an unforgettable experience.
Αυτό είναι το δωμάτιο μας της Mystras. Έχουμε ένα τέλεια τέα από το δωμάτιο μας. Καλημέρα. Μέρα 6 στην Ελλάδα. Είμαστε στις Mystras. Ξυπνήσαμε πρωί. Είναι 6 το πρωί και θα πάρουμε το αυτοκίνητο και θα πάμε Monemvasia.
Off the southeastern tip of Peloponnese lies the tiny island of Monemvasia. It was part of the mainland and got cut off due to the earthquake in 375 AD. Locals from the mainland escaped to the island and took refuge here during the 6th century Gothic attacks. As centuries passed and the Byzantine Empire regained control, peace returned to the region. Monemvasia became an important trading port, and the population and the construction spread downwards. Roaming the atmospheric village and getting lost in its narrow streets was a great way to spend the morning. A 30-minute climb from the main plaza brought us to the upper town, covered with the ruins of the 6th to 8th century dwellings. At the very top sits the pretty church of Hagia Sophia. The best and the most unforgettable sight, of course, were the splendid views of the lower town from the top of the cliff. Our destination for the day was Nafplio. A few kilometers before the city is the Bronze Age site of Tiryns. The second great Bronze Age civilization after the Minoans were the Mycenaeans. They started off playing second fiddle to the Minoans, but after the 1650 Santorini eruption, tables turned and Mycenae started dominating the Minoans. One striking difference between these two civilizations are these massive protective walls. Minoan cities were wall-less. They seem to have lived in a relative peace. Mycenaean walled themselves and seem to have lived in a constant fear and threat of war. The best surviving examples of these walls from the Mycenaean era can be found here in Tiryns, which was a satellite town of the main Mycenaean city. Here is the route we took for the day, and as I said, the day ended in Nafplio. This was a main port of Argos during the classical era. The city fell into obscurity afterwards till Venetians revived it in the 14th century. It changed hands a few times between the Venetians and the Ottomans during the 15th and 16th centuries. The Venetians built the imposing Palamidi fortress in 1714 during the second occupation of the city. The fortress commands an impressive view of the Gulf. It was in this fort that the great hero of Greek Revolution, Theodoros Kolokotronis, was held prisoner in 1823. Nafplio has a very well-preserved old town, mostly built by the Venetians in the 14th and 16th centuries. After the successful Greek Revolution, Nafplio became the first capital of the First Hellenic Republic in 1822. It was in front of this Agios Spiridon church in the old town that the first governor of the Republic, Ioannis Kapodistrias, was assassinated.
Αυτό είναι το δωμάτιο μας στο Ναύπλιο. Έχουμε μία μπαλκόνι με αυτήν τη θέα. Αυτό είναι το μπάνιο. Καλημέρα, η 7η μας μέρα στην Ελλάδα. Δεν κοιμάμαι πολύ καλά, γιατί οι επισκέπτες που έμειναν δίπλα μας έκαναν πολύ φασαρία και δεν κοιμάμαι πολύ καλά. Σήμερα θα πάρουμε το αυτοκίνητο και η πρώτη στάση μας είναι ο Epidaurus. Πάμε.
Half an hour east of Nafplio is the ancient site of Epidaurus. It's an ancient healing site dedicated to Asclepius, the son of Apollo and the Greek god of medicine, who is believed to have been born here. A temple dedicated to Asclepius was built here around 4th century BC, and the healing center remained functional till the 4th century AD decree of Theodosius. People used to come here from as far away as Rome and Egypt seeking cure for their illnesses. The money collected from the pilgrims helped fund the theatre nearby, the grandest in the ancient world. With incredible acoustics and a seating capacity of about 14,000, the theatre is still used for modern-day performances. The theatre and the nearby sanctuary are one of the 18 World Heritage Sites of Greece. Half an hour north of Nafplio is the ancient site of Mycenae. The civilization started around 2000 BC, and thanks to the decline of the Minoans, it peaked around 1400 BC and disappeared by 1100 BC. They were probably the same Achaeans that Homer refers to in his Iliad. Very few initially thought Iliad and Odyssey as anything more than complete fiction. Heinrich Schliemann was one of the very few. He was convinced the places in Iliad were real and successfully discovered both Troy in Turkey and Mycenae here. There is also evidence that Greeks around this time did launch a costly war against Troy, and that war drained their resources so much that they became easy pushovers for the Dorians, the Iron Age people from northern Greece who invaded Mycenae around 1100 BC, putting an end to the Bronze Age itself. The Mycenaeans copied the Minoan script Linear A and adapted it to fit their language. The resulting Mycenaean script, known as Linear B, has been successfully deciphered, and we know for a fact that it is Greek, at least an archaic form of it. Another half hour north of Mycenae is ancient Corinth. Corinth was founded in the middle of the Dark Ages around 9th century BC. During the following archaic age, the age of colonies and tyrants, Corinth helped find several colonies and was ruled by the most famous tyrant of the era, Periander. In the classical age, Corinth was an important ally of Sparta during the Peloponnesian War. After the defeat of the Athenians, Sparta and Thebes competed for hegemony, and as Corinth was midway between these two cities, it became the epicenter of most of these battles. Rome's conquest of Greece lasted from 198 BC to 146 BC, and it was here that the Greeks had their last stand. 146 BC was also the year Carthage finally fell, and Rome gave both Carthage and Corinth the same treatment, completely razing them to the ground. A century later, Julius Caesar rebuilt Corinth to its former glory, and all of what you see now are thanks to that reconstruction. Another century later, St. Paul came here to preach Christianity, and his letters to the citizens of Corinth became the book of the Corinthians, now part of the New Testament. Next up, Corinth Canal. Peloponnese is connected to rest of the Greece by a small land bridge, an isthmus of barely 7 km in length at its narrowest point. So if you can dig a canal across it, you can cut down weeks of navigation, a fact so obvious that people have been trying to dig the damn canal for millennia. The first one to attempt it was tyrant Periander of Corinth, way back in the 7th century BC. The isthmus was finally breached only in 1893 when the canal was finally completed. There aren't many good vantage points to view the canal. We went to the suspension bridge at Isthmia to gawk at the civil engineering masterpiece. Here, by the way, is the map of the route that we took on the final day of our road trip. The rest of the trip would be on foot and taxi. We returned the rental car close to midnight thanks to an 8-hour delay caused by a highway closure due to a fire accident.
Kalimera, η τελευταία μέρα μας στην Ελλάδα. Επιτέλους είμαστε στην Αθήνα. Και πρώτη στάση μας, η Ακρόπολη.
History of Athens goes back to at least the Bronze Age. The Acropolis was the site of one of Mycenae's satellite towns. It was here that the tyrant Pisistratos did his power grab, Clisthenes founded democracy, and where Pericles gave his famous Epitaphios. The first grand temples dedicated to Athena were built here during the 6th century BC. After the tragic loss of the Greeks at the Thermopylae, Persian army marched on the Athens and burned the Acropolis to the ground. After the eventual defeat of the Persians, Athens found the Delian League, a confederation of Greek islands where the Athens would police the seas and its allies would fund the expenses. Some of the funds collected were diverted into rebuilding the Acropolis. Most of the monuments you see today were built during this reconstruction in the 5th century BC under the order of Pericles. Parthenon became a church under the Byzantines and a garrison under the Ottomans. Most of the damage to these buildings happened during the 1687 siege by the Venetians during the Mauryan War. Around the foothills of Acropolis, there are a few interesting ancient sites, all included in the combined Acropolis ticket. First up, the Roman Agora. It was a market promised by Julius Caesar, funded by Augustus, and built by one Ephcles of Marathon around 20 BC. Its most interesting feature is the Tower of Winds, an ancient clock tower with a wind vane, water clock, and a sundial. The Roman Agora replaced an ancient one, which is located a couple of hundred meters away from it. The ancient Agora was the beating heart of Athens, where the likes of Themistocles, Haemon, Alcibiades were ostracized, where Socrates irritated everyone with his questions, and where St. Paul preached Christianity. It houses an imposing reconstructed stoa and a stunning temple of Hephaestus, built during the Periclean reconstruction spree. Then there is the temple of Olympian Zeus, the largest temple in ancient Greece. Started by Pisistratos in the 6th century BC and completed by Hadrian in 131 AD, who also built the nearby arch to commemorate the completion of the temple. In the same year, Hadrian also built a grand library, of which very little remains today. Next up, one of the world's most important museums, the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, housing the most precious antiques from Greek history. The signature pieces include this famous mask of Agamemnon from Mycenae, this stunning life-sized horse and jockey recovered from a shipwreck, this fresco of boxers from Santorini, and this marble masterpiece of Pan and Aphrodite. The collection is presented very well to give a good understanding of the evolution of Grecian art. In the Archaic Age, the sculptures used to look like this. Called kouros, they represented idealized form of human body, always striking this particular pose. Things changed in classical era, that is starting around 500 BC. The statue started taking more real-life poses and conveyed emotions and story. Since bronze was expensive, most bronze statues got melted and were replaced by marble copies. Pottery started off with these lovely marine life depictions during the Bronze Age that completely disappeared in the Dark Ages. Instead, we got these gigantic pots with intricate geometric patterns. The official name of the Dark Age is Geometric Period, thanks to this pottery. Black figure pottery started appearing in the 7th century BC and marks the transition into the classical era. This is the typical style that comes to mind when one thinks of antique Greek vases. In mature and later classical age, a more slender pottery style with a wide ground technique of vase painting known as likitos became popular. There was still one more museum to cover, the Museum of Cycladic Art. Cycladic is the third Bronze Age culture of Greece, independent of both the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, and also the least understood. And they could have been the first. They were soon absorbed into the Minoan civilization, and all that we have are these wonderful marble figurines. Okay, that was in the last day. There was one more. The last day was supposed to be just flying back home, but our flight wasn't leaving until 1 p.m., so we could squeeze in a couple of more things. First, Lofos Likavitou for sunrise. There are two hills in Athens offering the famous panoramic views of the Acropolis. One is Likavitos, which is good for sunrise. The other is Philopapou, which is good for sunset. Philopapou is closer to Acropolis than Likavitos and hence offers better pictures. Likavitos is the highest point in Athens, so from here you can get the bird's eye view of the entire city. The second and final stop before flying out was the 11th century Byzantine monastery of Daphne. This, along with Hosios Lukas that we covered on day 3, form a single World Heritage Site. This monastery started off as a temple of Apollo, which the Goths destroyed in 395 AD. The first monastery came up in 6th century, which didn't last very long. What you see today date to the 11th and 12th century reconstructions. This houses some impressive Middle Byzantine mosaics.
Αυτό είναι το δωμάτιο μας στην Ελλάδα και αυτό ήταν η πρώτη μας ταξίδι στην Ελλάδα. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για να παρακολουθήσατε μέχρι το τέλος. Ελπίζω να σας άρεσε. Ευχαριστώ για τα κανάλια όπου μου διδάσκει τα ελληνικά. Αυτά τα κανάλια είναι το Easy Greek, το Lingua Tree, το Do You Speak Greek και το Learn Greek with Zoe. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ να μου διδάσκει αυτή την υπέροχη και όμορφη γλώσσα σας. Χωρίς εσάς δεν μπορώ να πω ούτε μια λέξη στην ελληνικά. Είναι ώρα για να προκαλήσω την γυναίκα μου. Okay, Aparna, what are the top 3 places for you that you
The
visited?
top 3 would be first is Delphi, Santorini second, and third would be the Acropolis in Athens.
Okay, your top experience.
Walking through the Venetian Venetian harbour
Yeah.
and the restaurants around, the blue waters close to us, and it was wonderful. That was the best experience.
For me, the top 3 places would be more or less the same. I really liked Monemvasia, so that would come in top 3, but I don't know which one to drop. Για εμένα, η νούμερο 1 ταξιδιωτική εμπειρία ήταν για να μιλάω ελληνικά με τους ντόπιους. That's it. And until we say hi from some other part of the world, να είστε όλοι καλά.
Bye bye.